For more than 2 centuries, the United States stood as a symbol of unity, power, and pride. But in 2025, that image is beginning to crack. Deepening political rifts, skyrocketing healthcare costs, and relentless economic pressure are pushing some Americans to ask a wild but increasingly serious question: what if my state left the US and joined Canada instead? It may sound like fiction, but the numbers don't lie. A shocking 2025 survey found that 25% of residents in select U.S. states openly prefer Canada's healthcare system, social services, and political structure. They're not just admiring from afar, they're fantasizing about flipping flags. And guess what? Some states are already halfway there economically, culturally, and even geographically. Today, we reveal 10 U.S. states that could become Canadian overnight, and the data that will make you question just how permanent America's borders really are. But beware, what comes next will shock you. Number 10, New Hampshire. New Hampshire is fiercely independent, no state income tax, minimal regulations, and a population that prides itself on self-reliance. But in 2025, that very independence may be what draws it closer to Canada. With its population just over 1.36 million and a median household income of $75,000, New Hampshire faces a strange contradiction: economic strength but rising political cynicism. According to the New Hampshire Economic Review, more than 30% of residents say they'd prefer Canadian-style healthcare and education systems over the U.S. federal chaos they feel trapped in. Bordering Quebec and sharing a long New England history with Canada's maritime provinces, New Hampshire is no stranger to Canadian influence. Cross-border tourism, shared culture, and bilingual towns blur the national lines. Local farmers trade regularly with Quebecois markets, and towns like Colebrook and Pittsburgh feel more like Canada than the US already. What's more alarming? Younger voters under 35 are the most likely to say they'd rather have Canada's social policies than America's political dysfunction. And in a state where voter turnout is among the nation's highest, that sentiment carries serious weight. Could New Hampshire, in its pursuit of independence, declare emotional secession from Washington? And that's just the beginning. Number 9, Maine. If you've ever driven through northern Maine, you know it. This doesn't feel like the US anymore. From road signs in French to long-forgotten logging towns closer to Quebec than Boston, Maine already lives half in Canada. With a population of 1.3 million and a median household income of $55,000, Maine isn't poor, but it's stagnant, and it's looking for a lifeline. A stunning 70% of Mainers surveyed in 2025 said they're open to adopting Canadian-style social policies. Why? Because their healthcare system is crumbling, their young people are leaving, and property taxes keep climbing. The state's population has declined by 8% since 2000, and with it, faith in Washington's solutions has disappeared. Maine's French-Canadian heritage isn't just history, it's alive and thriving in the state's culture, food, and even politics. There's a reason why dual U.S.-Canadian citizenship applications have risen 40% in the last 2 years among Mainers. It's not fantasy, it's preparation. Could the U.S. wake up one day and find Maine gone not by force, but by quiet cultural divorce? Number 8, Vermont. Vermont is perhaps the U.S. state that already feels the most like Canada. Progressive politics? Check. Universal-style healthcare ambitions? Check. An overwhelming 65% of Vermonters in a 2024 poll said they'd embrace a Canadian-style social system today if it were offered. With a population of just 645, and a median household income around $65,000, Vermont is small but mighty. It punches above its weight in political discourse and often sets trends for progressive legislation. Housing prices here have risen by only 5% since 2010, a rare feat in America, and its citizens fiercely protect their environment, much like Canadian provinces. But the real kicker? Vermont's deep connection to Quebec, not just in culture, but in ideology. The Green Mountain State hosts dozens of Canadian festivals, French-speaking communities, and shared academic programs with Quebec universities. Their border isn't a barrier, it's a bridge. If the US were to fracture, Vermont wouldn't just survive it, would thrive under the maple leaf. Number 7, New York. Stretching from the Finger Lakes to the Adirondacks, has been on an economic and cultural island for decades. Despite the state's massive GDP of $1.7 trillion, upstate regions see median incomes barely scraping $50. And residents are fed up. According to the 2024 New York State Economic Report, 20% of upstate New Yorkers say they prefer Canada's system of taxation, healthcare, and political compromise. Why? Because they've seen Detroit and Buffalo decay while Albany and Washington send little help, but just across the border in Ontario, a different story. Cleaner cities, universal healthcare, and stronger infrastructure draw painful comparisons. Upstate towns like Plattsburgh, Watertown, and Ogdensburg have closer trade and cultural ties to Ontario than to downstate New York. Even regional universities now partner more with Canadian schools than with NYC-based institutions. This is no longer an American heartland, it's a northern limbo. Is it only a matter of time before upstate New York emotionally detaches from Manhattan and reorients toward Ottawa? Number 6, Michigan. Michigan built America's middle class, but in 2025, that legacy is eroding fast. The once mighty auto industry has shrunk by 15% since 2023, and with it, faith in the American dream. In Detroit and Flint, boarded-up factories stand next to soaring housing costs and failing schools. Is it any wonder that 35% of Detroit area residents now favor stronger economic and social ties with Canada? Michigan's physical connection to Canada is undeniable. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is one of the busiest in North America, funneling billions in trade and thousands of daily cross-border workers. But increasingly, Michigan residents are asking, why not just go all in? With a 2023 GDP of nearly $500 billion, Michigan has the scale to survive as an independent entity or a new Canadian province. What it lacks is confidence in federal rescue. A growing portion of its population believes Washington has forgotten them, while Canada's safety net and job retraining programs seem like lifeboats. Could Detroit be the epicenter of a continental realignment? Number 5, Minnesota. Minnesota shares more than a border with Canada. It shares values, often called the most Canadian U.S. pliant state. Minnesota boasts a GDP per capita of around $70, a focus on education, and one of the most robust public health networks in the U.S. And here's the shocker. Nearly 40% of Minnesotans in a 2024 poll said they support adopting Canadian-style social programs. Why? Because they already live in a hybrid system. Minnesota's healthcare costs are 15% lower than the national average, and its Scandinavian roots emphasizing community, equality, and sustainability mirror Canada's own political culture. Trade routes with Ontario and Manitoba have surged, and the state's capital, St. Paul, has hosted multiple Canadian consulates and bilateral forums. It's almost as if Minnesota is already rehearsing a different national anthem. In a future where red and blue states pull apart, could Minnesota calmly turn north and become the new Manitoba? Number 4, California. Now here's the wild card. California, the world's 5th largest economy, isn't exactly begging to join Canada. But what if its soaring cost of living, crippling taxes, and political alienation from federal policies push it toward a new alliance? With a 2023 GDP of $3.7 trillion and a median home price over $800 in metro areas, California feels more like a tech oligarchy than part of the U.S. middle class. Nearly 25% of Californians say they'd prefer a Canadian-style healthcare and social safety net, according to the California Economic Symposium. The state's politics are already more aligned with British Columbia than Texas. Universal healthcare, environmental regulations, and even education models mirror Canada's more than America's. The result? A state in open ideological rebellion. If California were ever to seek independences it's flirted with before, who would be its first ally? Don't be shocked if it's not D.C., but Ottawa. Number 3, Oregon. If Oregon fell into Canada tomorrow, would anyone even notice? Cities like Portland already feel like Vancouver's cousin, progressive, environmentally obsessed, and increasingly disillusioned with U.S. federal politics. The median home price in Portland has surged to $550, while the cost of living has jumped 18% since 2010. Rising property taxes up 12% over the past 5 years only add to the pressure. And in 2024, a public opinion study found that nearly 30% of Oregonians favor adopting more Canadian-style governance. The state's environmental laws already align with Canadian provincial standards, and Portland's social activism mirrors Montreal's more than Phoenix's. Trade with British Columbia is growing, and the cultural link is stronger than ever. Is Oregon quietly preparing for a Pacific Confederation? Number 2, Washington. The US-Canada border in Washington isn't just a lineage, it's a lifeline. With over $100 billion in annual trade with British Columbia, Washington state is already deeply integrated with Canada's economy. And in 2025, that integration is becoming political. Recent polls show that 33% of Washingtonians support policy frameworks more aligned with Canadian progressivism, especially around healthcare, climate, and labor rights. Median income sits around $80, but housing affordability, climate risk, and tech gentrification are pushing voters to consider drastic alternatives. Seattle's relationship with Vancouver has become more than a sister city partnership. It's a model for regional unity, separate from the chaotic polarization coming out of Washington, D.C. Could the other Washington, the one on the West Coast, lead a new Northwestern alliance with Canada? Number 1, Alaska. We arrive at the most surprising, yet most plausible contender, Alaska. Geographically disconnected from the continental U.S., Alaska shares an 800-mile border with Canada and, in many ways, it's already a northern nation. The state's economy is deeply tied to natural resources, and oil revenue has dropped 20% from 2023 to 2025, sparking panic. In response, nearly 50% of Alaskans polled said they'd support closer integration with Canada to stabilize their economy and healthcare systems. Alaska's indigenous communities have long-standing ties to Canadian First Nations. Trade routes, fishing regulations, and even regional councils already operate binationally. Culturally and geographically, Alaska is as Canadian as it gets except on paper. Is this the first U.S. state to formally seek an identity shift? Here's the bold question. Could these states really become Canadian overnight? Maybe not legally, not yet. But culturally, economically, ideologically, the shift is already underway. Borders are being blurred not by tanks or treaties, but by trade, trust, and shared values. What happens when the next recession hits? When the federal government stalls again? Will these states finally say, we're done with DC and look north instead? Are we witnessing the birth of a new North American Mapone where red, blue, and maple leaf collide? You decide. But one thing's clear. The US isn't as united as it once was.